Good morning, everyone, and happy Tuesday. I'm here today because the Holistic Pet Health Conference was about 2 weeks ago, and I just wanted to give you some of my favorite things that I learned while I was watching it. The conference is completely online, so it runs usually the second or third week of June every year, and they line up different speakers every day who post videos of them talking about certain topics, and they're usually really different topics, which is really nice because I feel like most of the mainstream stuff has been covered unless there's a new up-and-coming thing, so it's nice to learn something new once in a while. But the first speaker was Dr. Peter Dysbiosis. Most of you who follow my channel have heard of him at least. He's a vet in the United States that runs a supplement company and stuff like that. So he talked about nutrition, and he has some highlights. I'm going to run through those. When he first gets a client in, the very first thing that he offers to change for them is the diet. The second is he supplements the essential things that they're missing. So things like amino acids or minerals or joint supplements if they're older, things like that. He then recommends a detox if that doesn't work. And then he looks at spine, nerve, and muscle health if the detox doesn't work. After that, he looks at herbs, extracts, concentrates, homeopathy, things like that, which he sells on his website. And after that, if none of that works, then he looks at conventional veterinary medicine. So for him, he has a lot of dietary information, which if you're interested in about it, by all means go to his site and learn more. But he basically explains that synthetic vitamins and those made for humans aren't necessarily made for dogs, and he explicitly works with dogs. But they also can't make minerals in their body, so you have to supplement. They either have to be in their diet or they have to be supplemented in if their diet is inadequate. So really important. He talks about how fish oils, there was a long debate about whether fish oils were better or coconut oil was better or some type of seed oil was best, and he eventually started noticing after they were recommending fish oil to everybody that the mercury toxicity and the other heavy metal toxicity in the fish oils was getting really high, and it was noticed in dogs that took fish oil regularly. So if you are giving your dog fish oil, try switching to something else, and it might help lighten the load on their liver. He also said that in the research that he's done with nutrition, you cannot give a human probiotic to a dog. And a lot of people say that you can, and a lot of people say that you can't. So it's hard to discern who is right. But I know that the acidity of a dog's, and we're going to get to this, I think I learned this here, but the acidity of a dog's intestines, the pH is a lot less acidic, meaning if the food isn't digested fully in the stomach, the starches and everything are going to have a really hard time in the intestines, which is what causes constipation and gas and things like that. So making sure they have a good probiotic is really important. But the idea of supplementing or making sure that the minerals get into their diet is because minerals literally block toxins, which I found really interesting, because they take up the same receptors that the toxins would take up and block them from bonding. Therefore, the toxins stay in the blood and it's easier to flush them out, which I thought was really interesting because I have a half biology, half psychology background, and I remember learning about receptors and things like that. It was one of my favorite parts of biochemistry. But those are the highlights from his talk. The next one was Dr. Barbara Royal, and I know I've talked about her before. She runs the Royal Animal Health University in the United States. She's also Oprah's vet, which is how most people know her. But she did a talk about the ketogenic diet, and I know I've done a video about it before, but I just wanted to give you some notes. So I'm pretty sure she was mostly talking about dogs and cats in this, but they hold 70% of their gastrointestinal volume in their stomach. Therefore, they're supposed to eat larger meals, but less frequent, because once the process starts going, it goes for a little while. So if they don't have enough in their stomach, it's going to create acid and acidity problems in their system. But she also talks about intermittent fasting because realistically, If you're feeding them an ancestral diet, but you're feeding them regularly at the same times of day that they're used to, or the ancestral version of them is used to having periods where they don't have food. So if you're feeding them consistently, it's actually not good for their system. You're supposed to feed them this, like feed them sometimes, feed them at a different time of day every day. She says she feeds her dogs once a day, and sometimes she doesn't feed them because intermittent fasting is actually really good for their system, because not only does their system not have to work, so their gastrointestinal system gets to rest, but you also get the flushing out of the toxins that are already present. She talks about ketosis versus the regular method of metabolizing food, and how the two pathways, you can only have one on at the same time. So you're either in ketosis or you're not. You can't, if once your system flips onto one, it runs until it switches over, basically, and it runs out of one form of fuel. So instead of using, I'm just looking at the notes for a second here. Ketosis uses ketones. We've talked about this before. But once the body runs out of ketones, it switches back to using glucose as a fuel until it runs out of glucose, and then it'll try and switch back. But essentially, it's a energy-saving method that animals in the wild use because they can use whatever's available in their system, which is really nice. But she talks about all the things that we as the generation of pet parents are doing wrong and why our animals are suffering so much, especially with digestive issues, obesity issues, all the metabolic diseases. We're giving them too much glucose. We're feeding them too much overall. We're feeding processed foods. We're polluting our water, and then therefore they're drinking it, even if you filter the tap. And the air and soil is being filled with carcinogens in terms of pesticides and things like that. She also says stresses the importance of a species appropriate diet, which if you don't know what that is, I highly suggest you look it up, because most people assume it just means the base content of the food, but it actually is more about the type of food that you're giving, the amount of food, how often you're giving it, the variety in the diet, meaning if they're eating ancestral, they don't just eat straight meat. There are other things in there, sometimes they eat berries, or the predators the prey that they take down have grains in their stomach, and they do sometimes eat some, but it's already partially digested. Moisture, where it's sourced from, how fresh the ingredients are, and things like that. But don't cut fats out of their diet entirely, because they're very necessary to transport fat-soluble vitamins, which is A, D, E, and K. So if your animal is not eating any fat, or if you yourself are not eating any fat, then that's not good because your vitamins can't transport. But you can always look at more healthy fats, things like avocados, rather than, French fries, because you don't want all the fat in your system, you want the healthy fats. But she recommends that any dog over 20 pounds, you only have to feed it once a day. And again, it depends on the individual dog, but in terms of digestive quality, she recommends only one a day. Other mistakes: don't give any carbohydrate-based treats. That means anything that's baked. Dehydrated treats are really good because you're getting the nutrients of the thing, but you're not worried about it going bad as quickly. And there's usually no grains in it. No peanut butter, no beans, and nothing baked whatsoever. So that's the end of hers. Morning, Monica. Okay, the next talker after this lady was Dr. Christina Chambreau, and she was talking about holistic medical decision making for diarrhea and dysbiosis. So dysbiosis is the imbalance of the microbiome in the digestive system causing local or systemic symptoms. So essentially, if the bad bacteria in your stomach and your intestines outweighs the good bacteria, you probably have dysbiosis. And a lot of animals do because they're fed high starch foods, and it ends up killing most of the good bacteria in their stomach because they have to work extra hard to digest all the starch in the intestines because the pH is lower. Symptoms of dysbiosis include obesity, bloating, gas, and gurgling. So I get the question quite often, my dog's stomach gurgles, is that normal? I have to say no, because in horses it's normal, and there's a specific word for it, but in dogs and cats it's actually not. You're not supposed to hear them digesting their food, so meaning a lot of pet parents can because of the quality of the food that they feed, but even Kaya's stomach, if she gets too many treats one day, I can hear her food gurgling as she's digesting it. So something to keep in mind, adding probiotics is a really good way to help balance it out, but not just probiotics, a pre and probiotic will help the system move more smoothly and hopefully get rid of the gurgling. The speaker after that was Mary DeBono, and she talked about injury, arthritis, and anxiety. And I think there's a few more speakers, but the first two had the most notes, so don't worry. She talks about the downward spiral of arthritis in senior dogs. So if your animal is experiencing any of the following, then you may want to get some x-rays to see if they have arthritis. The first is obviously restricted movement. If they're stiff and sore and they don't have full limb mobility, that's a really good sign. If they don't want to go for walks like they used to, they can't jump in and out of a car or go upstairs, that's a really good sign. Diminished body awareness, meaning they'll bump into things more often or they'll be off balance more often. And it's good to check for these things, making sure that their motility is the same on both sides. They're stuck in a habitual way of doing things. So if they're struggling to do things that they used to do just fine, it could be because their mind still tells themselves that they can do something when physically they're not capable of doing it, which I find with senior humans, it's a lot of times the same case. They don't want to give up their independence, so they convince themselves that they can do all of these things that they can't actually physically do. Favoring, guarding, or compensating, which usually I see favoring a lot. If they injure one side, they start putting the weight on the other side. And quite often this ends up with an injury on the other side as well. And then you notice that they're compensating, which is usually why when I go to do laser therapy and people say, oh, well, she injured her, right shoulder. And I end up working on both shoulders because she's compensating by putting more weight on the other side, which also affects the top of her spine as well because she's twisting. Something to consider. Physical and or behavioral issues. So if you notice they're being more sensitive to touch, or if you notice that they're more aggressive, sometimes it could be that they're protecting themselves because they're in a weakened state. So just something to consider. Okay. We also had Dr. Timorin and Catherine Edwards. They talked about the role of the digestive organs, which this one I found super interesting, and I wrote a lot of notes for this one. They basically said if you don't understand nutrition, you don't understand your pet. Dogs can smell amino acids, which I found really interesting. But yes, this is where I learned this thing about the pH. Intestines are not acidic enough to break down protein. So if you're giving too much protein and the animal can't digest it in their stomach, they're going to have a lot of digestive problems. Starch, which is carbohydrates, isn't dissolved in the stomach. It's dissolved in the small intestine because there ends up not being enough enzymes in the stomach to digest it fully because it's busy digesting the protein. But because we overfeed the wrong foods to most animals, you're kind of forcing the carbohydrates through without the animal being fully able to absorb all the nutrients from it. This is when we overfeed and we feed the wrong things. It's basically like eating like bread for just like days and days and days, and then wondering why your system stopped up. Morning, Huda. The pancreas is specialized to keep the blood sugar levels balanced when there's no food in the stomach. So going back to what Barbara Royal said about it's okay to feed intermittently and feed only once a day because the pancreas will keep their blood sugar levels balanced, which is really nice. But remember that their digestive enzymes are weaker than ours, so a lot of time if you supplement with a digestive enzyme, it will help them fully process and absorb all the nutrients from the food. She talked a little bit about pancreatitis. So if your animal gets pancreatitis, you're demanding too much of their body. You want to feed once at dinner and intermittent fasting because you want to rest their gastrointestinal system. But they also need high intensity exercise, as most dogs do. Okay, there's only a couple more, I promise. The next one was all about the lymphatic system, which I find really interesting because most professionals don't really talk about the lymphatic system, but the lady who did it, Rita, she's also an herbalist, so that was really interesting. But she talks about the prevalence of lymph stagnation in chronic diseases, which is true because if your body stops circulating anything, you're in danger of a chronic disease. But lymph, especially because it's related to the immune system and flushing things out, because if you don't detox and have proper circulation, you're basically circulating toxins and waste in your system. Common indicators of a lymphatic issue include arthritis, crusty skin, eye leakage, a leaky gut, lethargy, an autoimmune disease, etc., etc. You can stimulate it through exercise, massage, or herbs, and by stimulating it, you're helping the body create more B and T cells. The B cells are from bone marrow, and the T cells are from the thymus gland, but by creating those, you're boosting the immune system. So it also helps get rid of other things, which is really amazing. It also nourishes and eliminates toxins from the body. It breaks down fats and oils. So if your pet is getting too much of something, maybe a little extra exercise or some massage, 2 of the major lymph nodes. One set is under the armpits, another set is under the jawline. The last one I want to talk about is Dr. Pat Johnson. She lives in Ireland, and her talk was titled "The Con in Conventional Medicine." And naturally, I found this topic really interesting, so I decided to watch the whole thing. This is the last one that I'm going to talk about. So she was a vet, and when she first got out of vet school, she found that the drug reps came to her and said, this is the vaccine schedule you're allowed to have, and these are the ones that you're allowed to give. This is how frequent you give them. So it wasn't, vets or doctors telling her this. It was the drug reps. She said that 10 to 15% of her income came from giving vaccines, 10% came from selling kibble, and 60 to 65% was just for lab tests, which I thought was really interesting. She talked about the creation of the immune system and how there's 2 parts of the immune system. The first is the cellular one called Th1, and essentially this is the bigger percentage of the immune system in a healthy body. This is the not inflammatory. So if you have a really strong Th1, this means your body can fight off things when it comes up. It means you don't get sick very often. It means you're healthy and strong and everything's good. This covers everything from bacteria, viruses, yeast, fungi, parasites, everything like that. The humoral immune system, or Th2, is the inflammatory one. So they did studies on this, that the percentage of the immune system relative to Th2 was higher in animals that were given vaccines because their immune response and the inflammatory response was higher. In dogs, 90% of the immune system and antibodies, they receive it through colostrum from the mother's milk. They're born with a leaky gut for the first 3 days so that their body can absorb large molecules from their mother's milk. So this is how they build their immune system. And a lot of people say, this is what she said in her talk, a lot of vets give vaccines, but studies have shown that puppies have fully evolved immune systems by the time they're weaned off their mother's milk. They have a fully functioning set up immune system and they don't actually need them. But a lot of people give the first round of puppy vaccines and then don't vaccinate after that, which again, she says, works perfectly fine. But they found that they've done autopsies on puppies that died from distemper or parvo. And even though they've had the vaccine, they noticed that there was a thymic depletion. And when you overgive vaccines, it depletes the ability of the thymus gland, the B and T cells, to function effectively. There's also cannabinoids in breast milk, which I found interesting because it causes the babies to want more. It's kind of like a little addiction when they're younger because it stimulates them to want more so that they keep drinking to keep building their immune system. But anyway, if you find any of this interesting, I highly suggest you sign up for next year's Holistic Pet Health Conference. It's free. They send you a link, and every day they send you the link for the talks that day. You don't have to watch all of them. There was a few I watched like the first 10 minutes, and it wasn't for me. But some of them are really informative, so I highly suggest if you want to learn more, this is a good place to go. That's all I have to say for today. Next week I'm going to be talking about the Animal Acupressure Certification Program that I'm starting to teach in October. I'm really excited about it, so if you want to learn more about it, come next Tuesday morning and I'm gonna tell you all about it and announce some other things. I also have online booking now available through my website, but only for distance therapies, because in-person therapies I have to account for distance and travel and things like that. So 3 of my therapies are now available to book online through my website, which is really exciting. So have a fabulous rest of your Tuesday, and I will see you next week.